Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, where we're going to talk about the new NIM tool tab we have available in QwickAnalytics. My name is Sean O'Brien. I'm president of QuickRate, and as always, I'm pleased to be joined by Steve Huntington. Steve, you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks everyone for joining us today. My name is Steve Huntington. I'm the director of QwickAnalytics here. I've been spent my entire career working with community banks and financial institutions. Everything from strategic planning and valuation to the types of tools that you see today. And I've been working with Sean at QuickRate here for a little over a decade.
Great. Thanks, Steve. Steve, unfortunately, his camera off today. He was having some connection issues. So we're going to hope we get through this thing with ease, but that's why Steve's not showing on the camera today.
I look exactly like that photo, just for so everyone knows.
I do not look like mine anymore. All right. Okay. So just a reminder, a couple of things. One, if you want to chat with us during the presentation, use the Q&A box or the chat feature. Steve and I'll monitor those during the discussion today. We'll either take them, intermittently or at the end of the presentation, but certainly we will monitor those. Secondly, as with all QuickRate webinars, we will be sending out an email with a link to the recording today, as well as a copy of our slides. So don't worry if you missed something. Like I said, we'll send out a copy of everything in probably the next day and a half. It might be today's Wednesday, probably on Friday afternoon. So just look for that when in your inbox. Okay, so just a reminder, thanks again for joining us. Most of you know the three different offerings that we have here at QuickRate: the non-brokered CD marketplace, QwickAnalytics, which we're going to discuss today. But our newest one is IntelliCredit. Some of you may not be completely familiar with that, but there we provide third-party loan reviews and as well as have technology that you can use in the bank for portfolio analytics. And there's an internal and annual review application as well. So certainly encourage you to listen into future webinars on any of our three offerings. Again, I think I just want to reemphasize, I suspect many of you might be QwickAnalytics subscribers today. So, again, this may be repetitive for you, but I think one of the advantages, of our solutions is that we make the integration, really quite easy. They're cloud-based. We're really trying to put tools in your hands to make you more efficient. We'll handle the data aggregation. You can handle the analysis. And so, NIM is certainly top of mind for us. Most of us are NIM lenders. And so, this has been on kind of our to-do list and just, felt like we needed to get it out here just because we know for, with the rising deposit costs and the trajectory of interest rates, obviously we're all worried about our NIM. And so this just hopefully will give you some insight into your NIM and then also what, the different elements that are impacting it and what kind of change that's resulting in your NIM. Just one final reminder, for those of you, if you aren't familiar with QwickAnalytics, we really do a number of different things. We provide you with some interactive bank pages. We, really cut our teeth with bank and peer performance. And then have added regulatory and compliance tools such as the CECL solver and a credit stress test. So again, we're really trying to aggregate data from a number of different sources, putting it all on your desktop, giving you 24/7 access, and again, just try to give you the information so you can better analyze your data. So at this point, we're going to kind of jump right into the NIM discussion. We'll do some slides afterward to kind of summarize or summarize what Steve's going to show you now, but we're going to keep our fingers crossed, and I'm going to hand the screen to Steve and hope the connection's a good one.
Yeah, thanks, Sean. And just as a reminder, not only does everyone will get a copy of the video and audio here, so you'll see the live demo. But we're also sending out a PowerPoint presentation that'll be in PDF format. And I've taken screenshots of the things that we're going to see here. So if you want to have something to print out that you can share with your management team, then we can do that as well. Personally excited for the webinar today because I get to talk about something other than CECL for a little while. now that we set our sights on things beyond the big transition that we all just made. So let me get my screen shared here. Should be popping up. Let's see. Should be popping up now. Sean, let me know if that happens.
I can see it.
Excellent. Fantastic. We're using as a guinea pig for today, like we do on a lot of our webinars, Camden National Bank. They're a larger community bank up in the Northeast. And if you're familiar with the platform, when we go to the My Bank section, after you log into QwickAnalytics and click on My Bank or click on your bank's name, we have all these different pages here, kind of table of contents, so to speak, and you'll see these two new-ish, but they've been out there for a few weeks now, net interest margin pages. We're going to start by talking a little bit about the balance yield or the peer-based analysis first, and then we'll go into the rate volume analysis second. So if I click on the balance or yield and peer, this is what shows up. So what we're looking at here is we're just doing a calculation of your net interest margin from all the various yield and cost components. This type of an analysis is something that you typically see in SEC documents like 10Qs and 10Ks from larger financial institutions that have to file those on a quarterly basis. And so what we're displaying on the peer-based page, or the comparative page, if you will, is your institution's yields or costs on various earning assets or liabilities, and then comparing them with peer averages or peer medians, if you will. You'll recognize this format with the color coding of the different ratios. It's what I like to call kind of a heat map of your performance, a visual heat map. The performance matrix here and the credit risk matrix, we have a couple other spots where we already use this format. And what you get to see is for any given point of time, for as of any date and using any duration, quarterly or year to date or the last 12 months, trailing 12 months, you can look at your various yields and costs and compare them with whatever peer group you want. By default, we're using the UBPR peer group 3, but we could use all the community banks in the state of Maine, since these guys happen to be in Maine, or any custom peer group you want, just like for any of the other pages on the platform. But the way you get to see kind of your margin being constructed is you see your numerator, right? Your income or expense, your denominator, the average balance of that earning asset or liability, and then the resulting yield, ratio, or cost. Now, whenever you're looking at these types of ratios, just like for an ROA or anything else, or not anything else, but for most ratios, they are annualized. So what that means, the benefit of annualization is that you can compare your first quarter net interest margin, right, for just the first 90 days of this year, or the first half of this year, with your margin from the entirety of 2022 on an apples to apples basis. And we do that by, for example, the interest income on interest bearing and due from depositories, 334,000. The average balance for them was 27 million. Since this is a quarterly value, this is just for the second quarter, we would actually be taking this ratio and multiplying it by 4 to annualize it. And that'll give us an annualized apples to apples yield of 4.95%. And so we can see here, we go through all the various yields on earning assets till you get the total yield, the yield on total earning assets of 4.14%. We show fully tax equivalent basis options as well. So for if you have any securities that are tax-free at state level or wherever, we have the FTE adjustment, and that FTE or fully tax equivalent adjustment, we're not doing that calculation. As you know, that can be a somewhat challenging calculation to do. We thought we would rely on the work and the methodology that the FDIC provides in the UBPR reports. So as you know, when you're filing your call report, you're not calculating a whole bunch of FTE adjustments all throughout your balance sheet and income statement. However, on the UBPR reports, which is a derivative report that the FDIC generates from your call reports, they do calculate a fully taxable equivalent adjustment for your securities portfolio and for your loan portfolio. So these guys, for example, have about a $180,000 increase in interest income on securities on a fully tax equivalent basis, and also a very slight, a $29,000 increase in interest income on loans on a fully tax equivalent basis. So we show all the ratios and everything on a stated as well as a fully tax equivalent basis. That's something that we haven't done before on the platform, so that's exciting. And as we work our way through the different parts, you can click on any individual asset class or liability class that you want, and then the charts will update on the fly. So if you want to see, your trend in total securities, your yield over the last 6 quarters, and your peer group's median yield over that same 6 quarters, you can see that. If you want to toggle and look at longer term trends, you can look at the last 6 years as opposed to the last six quarters. And if I change it from total securities to just MBS, you'll see that now we're looking at the yield on MBS. So it's an interactive type page here where you get to see your numerators, your denominators, your annualized yields or costs. And we also are comparing it to the peer group. So you see here their yield on mortgage-backed securities in the second quarter ended June 30th was 1.92%. Why is it orange? Because it's in the 20th to the 40th percentile compared to the peer group, meaning that they have a slightly below median yield on their mortgage-backed securities. If I were to change the peer group, this 1.92% wouldn't change because that's your bank's calculation, but where it is on the spectrum of below peers to superior to peers would change. So if I just click on, let's say, main peer group, still still happens to be in the 20th to 40th percentile. So that one didn't particularly help. But you can also view things not only as your ratio, but also the actual percentile rank. So if you're curious, well, all right, I'm in the 20th to 40th percentile range, the orange zone, so to speak, but what is my exact percentile? I can click on that, and they're in the 36th percentile compared to the peer group. So a little below average on mortgage-backed securities yields in the second quarter, but for other securities, for example, they're in the 80th percentile. So significantly above peer averages. So you can kind of toggle between your ratio and your percentile rank. So a lot of flexibility on this page. Again, this is just comparing your margin composition at any one given point in time for whatever duration you want compared to peer averages. We're not comparing you to yourself at another point in time. That's what we're going to do in just a second. So if I scroll down here to the other half of the page. Yes, Sean.
Steve, just a quick question came in, just a point of clarification, I think more than anything. The question was, is the NIM in the, we're displaying, is it 10Q and 10K data instead of call report data? I don't think that you want to clarify that. We took similar 10Qs and Ks.
Yeah, we're using the same data as we do for everything else on the platform for when we're looking at the call. This is call report data for the institution. So it's not using anything from, even though this is an SEC 10QE type analysis, the data is still coming directly from the call report. So if I were to compare this margin to go to the income statement and look at the net interest margin for the second quarter, you'll see that they are identical. So it's the same data source, call report data. If you want to see that data from an SEC basis, we do have that. So if you're looking at a publicly traded institution or an institution that files with the SEC, you can go to their SEC public documents and financials page where we do actually aggregate the SEC data as well, and you can see that there. But that's right, different data source for a different part of the platform. We're still all within the call report FDIC universe here, so to speak, but it's a good question. So if I just scrolling down towards the bottom of the page, this is just the liability side, right? Where you have your interest expense, your average balance, and then your rates, your interest rate on said liability. So same thing works. The only difference is, obviously, we're being subjective here that everyone wants higher yields. So higher is better on the yield side and lower is better on the cost side. Makes sense. So you'll see that ratios go from, the red to the green, they're actually declining from left to right, right? If you have a superior cost of funds to your peer group, that'll be a lower cost of funds to your peer group. So we do make that switch on the liability side, so it's intuitive from a below average to a or worse than average to a better than average compared to the peer group perspective. And because of the annualization, it allows us just, if we want to look at the second half of the year, I just click on year to date instead of MRQ, and it calculates. Now we're looking at the same thing, but you'll notice all these numerators are just about, or plus or minus about double what they would be for just a second period, right? And the average balance that we're using is for the whole first half of the year, the both, from January 1st to June 30th. A quick note about average balances. As you know, there is an average balance table, RCK, on the call reports. So when we're using an asset, an earning asset type or a liability type that does have an average, a quarterly average calculated on your call report, that's more accurate than just doing a 2-point average, right? Beginning of the quarter, end of the quarter, divided by 2, and you get an average over the quarter. But when you guys have to fill out the schedule RCK, you're doing daily or weekly averages throughout the whole quarter. So that's going to give you a more accurate average. So if we're using an asset type that does have an RCK value, then we calculate the average a little bit using that additional accuracy that's available. If one of these asset types or liability types is not on schedule RCK, then obviously if we were calculating a quarterly average, it would be a 2-point average. If we were calculating this, for example, year to date as of June 30th, it would be a 3-point average of June 30th balance, March 31st balance, and 12/31 balance from last year. A 3-point average would give you a first half of the year average without getting, those daily averages from the schedule RCK. So that's a kind of a finer distinction, but if you're trying to audit some of this data, it can be helpful. So that's all pretty much how you would handle or how you would use this first page when you're just looking at your margin at any point in time for the year or for the quarter or for the trailing 12 months compared to your peer group in that sort of way. Now the other page, so we call our rate volume analysis. This is another a further analysis that's the type of one that you would see in an SEC type document, but we thought it could be helpful for you guys to see that using the call report. So it's all the same earning assets, all the same interest-bearing liabilities and non-interest-bearing liabilities. But we're not, there's no peer data on here. We're simply comparing you at 2 different points in time. The great thing about this is because all these things are annualized, we can use any points in time that we want to use. We can compare year to date June 30th to year to date March 31st. We can compare the second quarter of this year to the first quarter of last year. A typical way this would be done would be using discrete quarters. If you just want to see how your second quarter was versus your first quarter of this year, right? This is kind of just what's changed over the last 90 days from a margin standpoint. Or if you go back 5 quarters, right? Go back to a year ago. The other typical way of looking at this is just a year over year, right? So instead of linked quarters, it's year over year, and you get to compare your yield or cost for each individual earning asset or liability with what it was in the older period. And so for a second now, Sean, I'm going to switch to have you presenting and showing the PowerPoint so we can go into details about some of this kind of second level analysis here on the right side of the page.
Great, Steve. Just one quick question just came
Sure.
in. I think we both know the answer, but it's actually probably a good one. Can you compare to another bank?
So comparing to another individual single bank is not something that we have within this part of the analysis. It's something that you can do using the Excel add-in tool, where we'll have we're probably going to build a template in Excel, Sean, which we haven't done yet. There's a handful of balance sheet, income statement, yield, cost analyses, but not specifically a margin composition analysis that's directly in the Excel environment. So you could build it yourself, or at some point we'll have it as kind of a pre-made template in Excel, so you can go do a side-by-side analysis, so to speak, of all your specific yields and costs versus the peer group.
Yeah, and that's a good point, right? So at some point, or today, you could build this independently in our add-in tool, pulling down all these fields and compare it to another bank.
Yes.
So yeah. All right, so let me grab back the screen here and okay, once this populated, there we go. Let's move to the next slide. So hopefully everyone can see that. Steve, you can see that. And it's again,
Yeah, I can see that. We're good.
Make
this is just a screenshot of the peer comparison type page. Next slide is just the bottom half of that page.
Yeah, and again, just the reminder here is that we just want you to have these, since Steve did the demo live, we wanted these just to have this as a leave behind.
Further,
same way with this one. And I think we're going to get to the page you want, which is here.
The next one. Right there. Okay. So this also, this is a screenshot of Excel, so you can see an easier way to how these net change in income or expense due to rate and volume. So it's another way that you can break down changes in your yields or costs over time, and seeing, for that particular earning asset, your income over that period of time changed as a result of a change in the interest rate, right? And a change in the volume you had of that earning asset over time. And so the way you calculate the change in income due to rate, for example, is by taking the change in rate, right? The change in yield. So about 16 basis points minus 11 basis points. So it's a 5 basis point change in yield. And you divide that and you multiply that by the average balance, the newer average balance. And that lets you know of that, what, $14,000 change. So in the first quarter of 2 years, or I guess this is 2 years ago, you had $45,000 in income. And then the following year, you only had $31,000 in income from that asset class. And so it decreased $14,000 net. There, due to rate, it actually increased, right? Because your yield went from 11 basis points to 16 basis points. And so you had a $9,000 relative increase due to your increase in yield. However, that was far outweighed by the change in overall yield due to, the change in income due to volume, because this institution had 162 million worth of that asset a year ago, and now only has 78 million. So that results in a $23,000 decline in interest income. And when you add 9,000, a positive 9,000 and a negative 23,000, what do you get? You get a net of minus 14,000, which is the exact difference in interest income from the older period to the newer period. So if you toggle to the next slide, Sean, you'll see the change in due to the volume, that negative 23,000. So what you're doing there is you're finding the difference in the balance, right? And then dividing that by the yield. So it kind of works the other way around. And the way the math works is that when you add your change in income due to rate and you change in income due to volume, those should always equal the total change in income, obviously. And they do in this case. So this is just a great way of letting you know that throughout your balance sheet on the yield, on the asset and the liability side, where some of these changes in interest income and expense are coming from. Is it more due to changes in rates or changes in your mix, or the volume of that particular earning asset or liability? Any questions on that? And by the way, there are also, you see there's a divided by 4 there in the Excel formula, because we have to sort of, all these ratios that we're using, the yields and the costs on this are all annualized. But when you're doing a change, some of these second tier type calculations, we don't want to be using an annualized. We want to de-annualize it, so to speak. And so if it's a quarterly number, you're gonna take that, you're gonna divide it by that yield by 4. If it was a semi-annual, it would be divided by 2. If you're looking at 2 full years, like all of 2022 versus all of 2021, you wouldn't have to do any additional math. but it's a kind of a de-annualized or unannualized yield for those calculations. So it should be a very helpful statistic in giving you much more information on where on how the overall change in interest income and where it's coming from an interest rate and from a change in mix standpoint. Sean, any thoughts?
Thanks, Steve.
That?
Yeah,
Sure.
no, I think that's great. I mean, I think I think really that's I think helpful in the sense that, again, we're all so driven by NIM. I think our feeling is that better understanding the impact that obviously changing balances or mix may have, or rate, this just really kind of gives you a good starting point, a consistent frame of reference each quarter, to see how that's evolved positively or negatively from quarter or year over year. So again, we're really excited that Steve put this together, and to introduce it as an additional tab in QwickAnalytics.
So now comes the fun one. So it's not we haven't come up with this. This is not a proprietary metric, but it's one that we've seen the Federal Reserve use a number of times in the past, particularly when they write some of their working papers about changes in margin at larger institutions and impact on from the interest rate environment and whatnot. But it's called margin contribution. And what we're specifically measuring here in this last column is change in margin contribution. You can see the formula for it there. It's a little bit robust. We're about to break it down into its components on the next couple pages, so you can have just kind of a little idea of what it means. And we're going to come back to this slide in just a second. But if you add up all your changes in margin contribution, so if you add up all the components there on the right, you're going to end up with the total change in your margin over the period. So it helps you, again, show you, if you had a net decline in your margin of 30 basis points, this will help give you a better understanding of where that came from within your balance sheet. So more detail, go to the next slide, and we'll come back to this at the end. So before we talk about changes in margin contribution, let's define, what do we mean by margin contribution? It's just a measure of how much each component of earning assets or liabilities contributes to the overall NIM of the institution. And so it's really interest income on a specific earning asset divided by the average balance of that asset, right? So that's the yield on that asset, multiplied by the balance of that asset as a percentage of total earning assets. So, or more simply put, yield on an earning asset times the proportion of it to total. The total NIM, and then, if you think of it that way, then your total margin is just a weighted average of all of these individual NIM components that we're calculating here. This is how the Federal Reserve explains it. We have a link at the bottom here if you're really curious about some more kind of mathematical details and how this ratio is used. There's a link to the source, and I took a little screenshot of it here, and it shows what that CNIM is, just contributions to net interest margin, and it's explained as the contribution of that asset type is the product of the average balance of the interest earned and the share of the assets relative to total interest earning assets. So that's what your margin, the margin contribution of any individual asset or liability is. But on the next slide, that's not particularly helpful in a vacuum by itself over one period of time, and really explaining what's going on, how sensitive your margin is to changes in interest rates, and where it's helping and hurting within your balance sheet as interest rates change and as you change the composition of your balance sheet. So I guess I'm kind of already saying what I'm saying here is that change in margin contribution over time that's really helpful in this analysis, and it allows you to compare any two periods of time irrespective of duration. So within this calculation, I can look at the margin contribution for a particular earning asset from the second quarter of this year and compare it to the whole first half of this year. So we don't even have to be using discrete quarters or discrete 6-month or annual periods in order to compare. You can compare apples to apples, any two periods, any two durations. And again, this is, I took another snapshot of the Fed's definition of that change in time. So given all this, if you can go back 2 slides, Sean, we'll see what it actually looks like in the tool there. So you see all that math up there in Excel. For total securities, you see there's an 11 basis point change in margin contribution. So what we do is we're looking at the fact that for the overall margin, your net interest income has increased by almost 50% over that period, and your balance has increased 50% over that period. But the change in margin contribution is what gives you an idea that, for your overall decrease in yield of 9 basis points. So this institution had a 9 basis point decrease in yield over that year-long period. The securities were actually a positive element of that. We had loss of margin contribution of 20 basis points on the loan portfolio, but positive 11 basis points on the securities portfolio. And again, if you add up all those changes in margin contribution, you will end up with the total change in yield of 9 basis points. So just kind of, it's a decomposition of that 9 basis point decrease in total yield to show you of that 9 basis points, where are the areas that are actually define the decrease, and where maybe some highlight areas that moderated that decrease. If you were looking at your yield on loans and said, our loan yield decreased 20 basis points, but our earning asset yield only decreased 9 basis points. Why is that? Well, because of a significant growth in the securities portfolio, right? Offsetting that. They had a decrease in yield on loans, but they did not have any decrease in yield on securities. So relatively speaking, securities was a bright spot in your yield composition, or your yield and margin change over time, despite the overall negative 9 basis points. Sean, any other thoughts to shed light on how that can be helpful?
Yeah, no, again, I think, I think we're all always trying to better understand this. And again, hopefully this puts us in, a starting position to begin to decide, what maybe, as we think about our ALM policies or just, movements going forward, product mix, setting rates, just where the drivers are being most felt. And again, I think this just gives you a great introductory, roadmap, to better understanding that.
And again, right at the bottom of the page itself, in fact, Sean, why don't you give me the screen back, because there's one other thing I'd like to share, and then something, another little enhancement that we're in the process of making now that I'd like to share as well.
You should be able to take it.
Yeah, I can. I'm going to share my screen again, and I'm going here. So again, at the bottom of the screen, there's a link right there to the Federal Reserve's. And this is where the screenshots I was taking was coming from. It was from the Federal Reserve. There was a working paper they did a few years ago discussing margins being compressed at large institutions. And then it goes through this entire analysis of what a margin contribution is and how they change over time and what that means. So this is a really helpful article if you're curious about and want more information about the particular ratio, that metric itself. Now, changing gears for just a second, we've had a lot of requests over time for some help in defining ratios. If we had sort of a data dictionary or someplace that you could all go to where you could see how we're calculating all these different ratios, where all the call report data points are coming from when we're calculating ROA, why it might be slightly different from your UBPR report or from some of your own calculations. There's easier and harder ways to do that. We could have just provided you with some 700-page tome, so to speak, with every single ratio we calculate and all the details of that. But of course, it would be constantly changing and it wouldn't be very practical. So we came up with a more practical solution that we're going to be rolling out over the next few weeks here. And this is just our income statement page right on our interactive pages. This isn't live yet, but it will be very soon. You notice as I'm hovering over each of these different line items, there's a little blue eye. right here for each line item. And if you hover over it, it'll say click here for the formula and for notes. So if I say, all right, I want to know about your non-interest income core to assets, or what do we mean by core non-interest income and how is that calculated? So if I click on this, now we get a new pop-up box. It says, hey, this is coming from your 051 call report. This is exactly how we do the calculation for non-interest income core to average assets, which call report line items are in the numerator and the denominator. And we let you know that the denominator is the average balance over the period. If we have, for example, overhead expense core, we show you how that's calculated. And where there's things to be explained, for example, we exclude certain non-core expenses such as amortization and impairment related charges. So it explains, how it might be a little bit different than your total non-interest expense on your income, on your call report. And then also reminding you, so any relevant notes to the formula and the exact formula calculation for each of the line items as we go through the income statement here. So there'll be certain pages where this is not quite as practical to do, but this basic layout we have where we have, an income statement, deposit yields, costs, regulatory capital, securities, all that good stuff. We'll be rolling this out in the very near future. If you're curious about, if we're looking at ROA here, return on average assets, tax affected for S corps at an assumed rate of 21%, which was the 35% before 2018. So some helpful notes in addition to the actual, it's RAAD 4340 divided by RCON 3368. Or if you're filing an 031, if you're a larger institution, that's one of the ones that's the RCFD instead of RCON. So we let you know it can be either one depending upon which version of the call report you happen to be filing. And this also lets you know that it's the actual data dictionary ID number. That can be helpful in our Excel add-in. So if you're familiar with our Excel add-in, you can go right into the add-in. You can add any fields you want. So if you're kind of looking for a way to find certain fields, or if you see a field on here and you want to immediately recreate it in the add-in without, searching for the field by its name or whatnot, you can find the actual field ID right here, type it into Excel, and then when you update the tool in Excel, it'll update that way. So we're just giving you different ways, more ways of getting the information that you need right at your fingertips in a practical format. We'll also be adding a data dictionary page or a search page right onto the interactive tool here. So, you don't have to, if you're trying to find how we calculate ROA, you don't have to necessarily, all right, where's the ROA? All right, it's in the income statement, it's 3/4 of the way down, there's ROA. Then I click on the blue thing and now I have my formula. You'll be able to just go to a search box and type in ROA and hit enter, and then you'll get that same information. Any notes about the formula and how it's calculated? Sean?
Yeah, and so again, I think this is, as Steve said, this has been a big undertaking. I know quarterly, we get requests kind of regularly on how we calculate something. So this will be kind of an ongoing process. We're excited to get it out there, but it'll certainly continue to evolve and hopefully improve, all with the idea of trying to make sure you're able to understand completely, how all these numbers are put together in case there's any questions. Because typically, we find when it comes to ratios, obviously the UBPR, a lot of times people will look at things and, there they use trimmed averages. We're using call report data. I think we're trying to best, help you understand where we're coming from, whether we're using a point in time for the denominator, an average asset, or number for the denominator. A lot of those things end up being small variances, but it, can be at times frustrating for you if you don't completely understand, where we're coming from. So hopefully this will, make everything a lot more transparent and immediately accessible for you. And as I mentioned, will be kind of a ongoing process to better improve that.
Yeah, and it's a finer point, but it's an important one because we do get questions on it. The UBPR report is something that's auto-generated by the FDIC based on call report data, right? So it's a derivative report based upon the call report data, and then some additional math they overlay on top of it. All of our tools here come directly from the call report data. So up until this NIM decomposition page, We never took any single data point from a UBPR report. The UBPR took it from the call report. We are also taking it directly from the call report. We didn't want to do a derivative of a derivative, so to speak. And we thought there were some ways that the UBPR reports calculate things which were either irrational or could be improved upon. And so we took the liberty of, for certain ratios, where, for example, the UBPR report might be in adding up your average assets or calculating average assets to calculate, or average earning assets to calculate a net interest margin. They might be using net loans as an earning asset as opposed to gross loans. And while you certainly have to have your loan loss reserve account is on the books, but it is not a type of account that it's not like the $2 million in reserve that you have in your loans are suddenly not earning assets because they happen to have a reserve account against them, right? Those are still earning assets from our perspective, so they should be factored into a net interest margin, and you should be getting credit for those. You shouldn't be, your reserve should not be subtracting from your yield calculation. So we have a slight difference in methodology for some of those ratios that we think is more intuitive to us. Most of our ratios will line up very closely with, or if not identically, with the UBPR. And when it doesn't, we try to explain as best we can why. We find some spots in the UBPR report, they'll use a 2-point average, and then sometimes they'll use a 5-point average, and we don't even really understand. There's no explanation there of why they switched methodologies for the same type of calculation. So there's ways we believe we've improved upon the UBPR calculations, and we point those out where and when necessary. But the one the one exception to that rule is the fully tax equivalent adjustment that we're making for FTE margin calculations is coming from the actual UBPR report itself. Since that's not calculated in the call report, it is a UBPR calculation. We are taking that FTE adjustment directly from the UBPR, because that's one area we think they do a pretty good and comprehensive job of making those adjustments. So we decided to piggyback off of that. Sean?
Great, thanks, Steve. Yeah, and I think that was the point, is that sometimes it's just apples to apples. We just want to make sure, be able to highlight why we've done something differently.
Yep.
Steve, there was a question came in, regarding securities. Are they reported net of unrealized losses in the NIM?
It's whatever the income on your schedule RI for that securities item. So
yeah, so I wouldn't think that. Yeah, we wouldn't show the change in their market value. I mean, that's reported in the call report, but we wouldn't have that kind of granular data across those different segments. So
yeah. So there, sometimes, like for example, for the on the loan portfolio, right? You have when you're looking at the individual line items in your loan portfolio, you don't get them net of those items. But the at the bottom of Schedule RCC, there's one gross net adjustment for that. But see, on the income statement here, we take the values directly from these income and expense line items.
Perfect. Great. Let's see. Do you want me to take back the screen?
Yes. Hold on, let me unshare here.
Yeah, I can take it. Let me just grab that back. Oops. The screenshot.
So what I meant was that, unearned error, we've been asked the loan balances for each individual loan type net of unearned income on loans. Unfortunately, it's not, because on the call report, they don't ask you to separate the unearned income from loans on a segment by segment basis. They just do a gross adjustment on the whole portfolio. So we can't net it out of each individual segment.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly right. Okay, so back to the PowerPoint. We've covered these. Let me just slide through ahead through these. Steve touched on the data dictionary update. So again, this is just a placeholder to let you know that's coming. So we're excited to be able to launch that. I did just want to touch on a few different areas of QwickAnalytics. We talked about NIM today. In upcoming webinars like this, we're going to dive into, our interactive credit stress test. That's a tool that's available, probably becoming more timely again. Certainly maybe, year end running this or even into the third quarter. So we'll probably, again, in an upcoming webinar, schedule a deeper dive into our interactive stress test. Steve referenced our add-in tool. Again, this is something you can download today. When you do, it will put a QwickAnalytics selection up on your toolbar. You log into the add-in tool with your same username and password that you have for QwickAnalytics. You can log in independently of being in QwickAnalytics, but as Steve mentioned, you could do bank comparisons of NIM here. You can kind of replicate any spreadsheets you might be doing currently. So you really have access to all of the information in QwickAnalytics and have the ability to import that, including your peer groups, right into your own Excel spreadsheet. Steve, anything just high level you want to share here on the add-in tool? This will be another webinar topic to dive in deeper.
Yeah. Whenever you have an open end like that, Sean, I'm going to start talking. So it uses the Excel environment to pull any of our data. So if you have your own model, if you have your own kind of set of ratios you like to look at in a very formatted way in Excel, you can add another tab to your existing Excel spreadsheet and pull down all the raw data that you want from you or your peer group or whatever, and then link your analyses to that raw data. And then all you have to do each quarter is change the date and click refresh. And any analysis you have that's based upon call report data, yours or comparative, or any models that you have, will get updated and refreshed. So it's really just any regular Excel spreadsheet you can integrate any of this data. So if you're building a fully fledged capital model or M&A model or comparative peer type tool, you can integrate our data, whether it's holding company, call report, even credit union data now too, and publicly available data too. So SEC documents and even trading data and valuation data for those of us who have stock tickers and have that type of valuation. All of it you can pull right into Excel and then do anything you want with it. We're coming up with newer and better ways to provide some of these tools. So you're gonna see in the future, we're gonna be adding some Excel specific tools, some tools that we know, hey, this is the type of tool that all of our users are going to want to customize. They might want to add in some non-public information to make this tool more robust. Like, let's say we have a liquidity tool and we'd like to give you the option to add some liquidity type metrics that aren't ones we can get from call report data. We might build a tool directly in the Excel environment in the future, which we're already working on, by the way. And then have this be kind of the way you get certain analyses directly in Excel that don't lend themselves to just kind of logging in online and changing only the spots that we allow you to change, and so on and so forth. John.
Thanks, Steve. Yeah. So again, I think this is an area that we think, is a really powerful tool. If you're an Excel user, we're not sure. We think there's more horsepower here for a lot of our users. So again, this is an area we're going to dive into in an upcoming webinar to try to again, better demonstrate, what you can do with the add-in tool. So just a reminder, we think QwickAnalytics can help you in a number of different ways. Certainly, we're really, focused on aggregating data so you can do your analysis. We think that's a better, match of resources, right? Let us aggregate, let you analyze. I think that's the best way for us to be the most efficient we can. And that's really part of what QwickAnalytics does, right? It's designed to get you and your team, to be more efficient, to give you more horsepower, to do better analysis and deeper dives on a number of different fronts in the bank. We do have a number of upcoming webinars. We do have a loan review webinar next week. David Ruffin will be handling that along with David Littleton from our IntelliCredit team. I encourage you, if you've not watched our webinar with Zane Smith, Zane's the Chief Credit Officer and Risk Officer from American Bank in Texas. He discusses how he uses the portfolio analyzer. I think this was a really informative, short, webinar where Zane really does, kind of explain how he's using it and the value that it brings to him on a daily basis. We will be back in September for our coffee talk in September, and then in October, we'll welcome back our dear friend Paul Allen from Saltmarsh, who will join us for our coffee talk in October. Any final questions? Go ahead and submit those now while we wait to see if there are any. Steve, any final words? I'm glad your connection stayed solid. Anything to add to let everybody go today?
No, just to expect, we spent a lot of time and energy focusing on the CECL transition for all of our users. And now we're able to sort of take a little bit of breath from that. And we've been looking at so if there's areas that you think that are of concern to you that that we don't go in as much detail as you would like to see, we would love to hear from you guys as to, hey, we'd like some more liquidity tools or some more margin type tools or whatever those might be. We're focusing on what's coming next at this point now that CECL is somewhat behind us. And so it's an exciting time as we develop tools outside of that box.
Yeah, and I think, again, I think we've got some upcoming tools, and some of them, like Steve mentioned, we're going to develop within the tool itself, but then we're also going to do, we think we can move quicker by developing some of the tools in Excel through the add-in tool. So I think we'll be, looking to try to accelerate, some of those offerings by leveraging our add-in tool as well.
So I'd strongly suggest if you're not familiar with the Excel add-in tool or you haven't used it very much, if you can attend that webinar, great. If you can't, register for it anyway, and we'll send you a copy of the presentation and the video so you can watch that. If you want to reach out to us and get kind of a one-on-one walkthrough of the add-in tool, so that you're more comfortable with it when some of these other analyses come out based in the tool, then please feel free to do so.
And so, again, I think that's what we have for today. I want to thank you all for joining us again. We really appreciate it. As Steve said, please let us know. We do have, some tools that we'll be announcing here in the next month or so as well. So we're going to try to, again, continue to roll out hopefully timely and helpful tools. So anything else that's top of mind for you, let us know. Otherwise, again, we will be sending out an email with the link to today's recording and a copy of the slides. So look for that probably on Friday. And then, hope everyone has a good day and a relaxing Labor Day weekend upcoming. And we'll look for you next time when we have a webinar. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks, everyone.